Alright, hello everybody! So we are back once again with this map series. You guys do seem to really enjoy it, and Flounder was by far the most requested one, so I think we'll jump to this one next. Please let me know in the comments below what you want to see after this, because I will be trying to cover these in the order you guys request, so let me know in the comments what map you want to see next. So, Flounder is a very different map than a lot of the ones we're going to be playing on. And that's mainly because of the verticality and all the different walls you need to climb in order to approach the stage. You know, you have all of these, everything over here. The entire stage is basically filled with these walls to be able to climb up. And generally, like I talked about a little bit last time, climbing up walls is a bad thing. It's generally not an advantageous position to be in. It's hard to approach high ground. But we start to get to walls that are so high up that even the weapons that could poke on things like the stack on stuff like Mako Mart can't really do that here. So they're still very favored, of course. This is a very AoE favored, very short range favored map. But it doesn't really get you out of disadvantage as much. So this is a very lockout heavy stage. This is a map where you want to get map control and you want to be really good at keeping the enemies off of it. It's also our first double zones map we'll be talking about. And basically, the main thing you need to know for double zones is that generally it's very easy to contest because you only need to neutralize 50% of one zone, which is like just this, in order to stop the timer. So it makes it much easier to stall, especially on maps where you can hit both zones. However, this is probably the two-zone map where it's the least applicable, because in order to contest the zone, you have to be very far. The safest spot to contest zone in is probably like throwing suction bombs from this rail over here, which even then is a very, very exposed position. So this can be very, very tricky. Because of all the paintable walls as well, this is actually a stage where a few unique things become a little bit stronger, because while it is a lot of paintable walls, it's very difficult to watch all of them at the same time, so flanks are very powerful. And so for once, this special is actually pretty useful here. We saw some C Junior before in Area Cup I never really talked about, but that's because you put it here, and it hits like every single one of these walls. Even the walls over here on the low ground that I haven't really talked about as much, like these, are hit as well. And so people can't really climb up, and you can kind of use it as a way to cover all the approaches. So that's why Wave used to be a thing that was, or not used to be, that's why Wave is a little bit situationally more common on this map, which is kind of interesting. But for the most part, though, I think this stage breaks down into three, very distinct phases. One is neutral, where teams typically have either roof, so you'll have some space over here, and it'll mostly be vying for the low ground in this trench that people will be fighting for, because the trench is the best way to pull people's attention, because you don't really want to be looking down from the roof area up here. So it's really, really crucial to take some kind of space down here. If you can get drops and control these ledges, it's really easy to poke damage up, because this is higher up than this. So stuff like your buckets, blasters, etc. can sit down here and shoot up, and it's much harder to contest or get them out of it. It usually requires some kind of special. And people will also hunker down a little bit to try to keep the high ground over here. However, once you push people backward, they can't really go much further than back here, because they'll get cornered. And so you kind of have to invest resources like crabs or bubbles on this high ground here in order to keep this kind of space control, because if you give it up and you get pushed down, it's a big problem. This is one of those maps where you really have to fight and play your life out over retreating, because just walking this far backward is hugely detrimental. It's really hard to get back once you lose that, so you really don't want to give up your roof as much as possible. So besides that, when it comes to crossing, what are some advantages you can get? Typically, you want to try to get your specials as further forward into this area as possible. Things like crab or bubble, etc. are very useful here, because your goal is to have your long-range weapon or mid-range weapon, depending on what you have, hit these two areas to help force people off. This is especially true if you have a backline like Explosher, but even something like Pencil being picked on the stage could be good for that. You want Edit to reach here. If you can clear this top part, that's the main way you gain control. So basically, neutral in this map is get the trench, get further forward in middle, use that to clear people off the high ground. So what do you do if you're holding? If you're holding, typically you want to push up very aggressively on this map, and that's because you want to limit access to all these walls. So If I use the blue line here, you can see just how, like, this is the widest angle I can get behind people here. So the easiest way to prevent people from going all the way up to this far, any of these walls, you don't want people going in this area, basically, because then you have to be pulled away to deal with it. So the best way to cover that is to either be up here with some kind of defensive weapon, like a backline weapon like pencil that can crossfire, you know, hit people on snipe beforehand and take people away from that position early, or you need to push up really aggressively. So, you know, get a pen over here, let's get the weapon, or you could try to push really far down this ramp into their spawn, if possible, even getting someone on snipe. Because the idea is if you control snipe, all of a sudden this route isn't accessible anymore. Your anchor weapon can just focus on putting shots down here, and you play for this high ground here and try to control this kind of box of space. Especially making sure that this alley is covered, because the main way the defenders can get behind you without going all the way around is this route back here. Really important that you secure this before there's something like a bucket or a blaster down there. That can make it a lot easier to trade you out. And you basically want to just fight into this court, because if you lose your fight here, they still have to walk all the way back up, and you guys can just regroup to your pen. Your pen moves like 2 feet backwards, or edit, or whatever anchor you have, and you're totally fine. So you want to play really aggressive. Until you're able to get that far, though, because it's pretty difficult to even make it all the way over there, you really want to try and control this wall, have some kind of blaster, bucket, whatever, cover this giant wall here, because typically any good retake special needs to set up here. Jetpacks are going to go over this wall, Crab Tank wants to go on this wall, Bubble wants to be over it, etc., etc. Pretty much any key special for pushing you guys further back, or even weapon, wants to take this ramp, and that's the main spot you need to prevent. So you're playing to prevent this, get some kind of way to push through this area, barrel through this area, and keep them in the corner. If you are retaking, the sides are by far the most important on this map. This area and this route. If you drop down here and can just poke, like you can put a dynamo on the grates flicking, you can try to have someone flank zone. Typically Bubble and Crab weapons are great for this, because if you have like a dually, for example, paint this wall and sneak over here, they're just gonna pop Crab, and their Crab is just gonna live forever. And the interesting part about this map, the kind of long flank you can do here, is if you get something like a Crab all the way back here, you can just have people jump to it. Same for a Bubble, right? Let's use Bubble. So if you get a Bubble over here, you get people jumping, and then this team is suddenly setting up on your side of the map, and they have this massive angle that can sort of pin you there. Typically, we don't see people running through trench as much on retake anymore. It's typically just about getting to the high grounds, and the trench is very covered nowadays, so you don't see that as much anymore. But those two routes are kind of the main things. If you are going through the middle of the map, you typically want to fight with your cooler early, play your trades, and save your specials later. So typically stuff like specials would go first, which you can do sometimes. Like Crab is okay on some positions. So let's talk about that first, actually. It's like, let's say you get a Crab right here, right, on snipe. Your Crab guy is now stuck here for 8 seconds, especially bad if you have another anchor. Then they have to walk all the way up here, which is going to take forever to get through. So you're not going to see that too much. So typically, it's much better to try and get your Crab or other specials somewhere over here or even over here. So a lot of the times when retaking, I think this is one of the few maps where you kind of want to just try and brute force with the cooler or as minimal specials as possible to fight your way up this ramp. And then try to use your specials once you can at least get to this wall, or even better, onto your zone. So this map is definitely a lot more main weapon fighting. Both teams want to push extremely far in to get rid of the amount of roots on this map. It's very punishing to make a mistake because of all the walls that you can get stuck climbing on. And the main thing is just that a lot of the power positions for the specials are in their neutral spots. So you really have to work to be able to set up specials to retake on this map, and using them earlier, if anything, punishes you, because you quite literally get stuck with, like, you don't want to Bubble down here, you don't want to Crab down here, you don't want to Jet recall down here. So like all these specials that can kind of anchor your positions get you stuck down here, which is also why typically I think this map is actually pretty good for specials that don't take up a player. Like Inkstorm, for instance, is pretty good here, because, like, yeah, on top of the map being cramped, I can throw an Inkstorm, hit this giant area, and I'm not, like, locking myself in if I want to be more defensive or more aggressive. I'm not committing to the position I'm in. Missiles is also pretty good for this. Missiles also gives location away on a map with a lot of places to hide. So there are some different specials here. Stuff like wave and location specials are a bit better here than normal, while specials that anchor your position are a little bit worse, which I find kind of interesting. That's a good way to mix it up a little bit. But yeah, this map has gotten a reputation for being a little bit brutal, a little bit lockout heavy, and it definitely is. But I think nowadays, with a bit more of a main weapon focus meta, I do really appreciate the main weapon focus on the first part of defense, and the many different routes you can get once you do get to the neutral phase of the map are definitely important. I haven't even talked about stuff like flanking around in general, like trying to go through this lower route if you're something like an ink brush, because it's kind of situational. But sometimes you'll even see that kind of wider angle being used. There is just still a decent amount of room for creativity on this map. It has a lot of positives, a lot of negatives, but overall, I think that means Flounder Heights lends itself to a little bit more short range, a little bit more main weapon focused strategies that I find pretty interesting. And if teams are able to get really good at getting through the lockout stage and push up more aggressive, they're going to be favored here. But this is definitely a stage you pick when you're feeling really confident, when you're really aggressive, and you can't really let go of the brakes at one point, because being passive at any point other than locking out, again, like this far, is going to get you punished. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Flounder. So I hope you all enjoyed. And again, let me know what stage you want to see next.